Hey everybody, Smart Silver Stacker here. Welcome to another Smart Silver Stacker live stream. We've got a lot to talk about today. Doing a live stream today because I think it's the best way to cover these breaking stories as they unfold. And we've certainly got a lot unfolding today. The banking sector here in the US is continuing to plummet. It's continuing its free fall. Now, this is a story that I've got pulled up on the screen here from May 1st, so the beginning of this week. Had Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, telling us that this part of the crisis is over. Well, Jamie Dimon looks like he's got some egg on his face today because very clearly, based on what we are observing today in the markets, the crisis is far from over. Now, if you're tuning in, hello, welcome to the live stream. I see some folks in the chat there. Please do give the video a thumbs up, smash that like button, help get this out into the algorithm so we can help spread some real information about the banking system, not what JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon is telling us here that the crisis is over. You know, it's all damage control. And we've got a crazy for Mopar in the chat there saying First Horizon TD Bank call off $13 billion deal to form sixth largest bank in the US. Yeah. We're going to get into that story and much more in today's video. Now, taking a look at the price of gold, you can see gold reacting pretty favorably to this continuing devolution of the financial system here in the U.S. And clearly, gold and silver are catching a safe haven bid here. Gold is up to $2,059. So we are just a hair's breadth away once again from an all-time high in the price of gold. Silver back up over 26 bucks. Now, I've been calling for a potential pullback. Nothing's guaranteed, of course, but I do still think that we could see a pullback in the price of gold and silver. However, I will say that I provided the caveat when I first called for a pullback in the price of gold and silver from this level, that if we continue to see banks collapsing in the U.S., we might not get that. And, well, that's what we're seeing. Hey, everybody in the chat there. We've got Billy saying he finally made it to a live stream. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not real consistent with the timing on these. It might be hard to tune in real time. Maybe I could do a regular time, but I try to just hop on them whenever there's breaking news. And this is the story, one of the main stories of the day. Canada's TD Bank calling off their $13.4 billion purchase of First Horizon, one of these troubled U.S. banks. And this has triggered a major sell-off in First Horizon. You can see on the 3-month chart here of First Horizon Corporation, it's a U.S.-based regional bank. The share price today down over 36%. And it has been a very rough ride for this and many of these other regional banks since February. You can see back in February, the price of First Horizon Bank up around $25, and today down to $9.48. And, this is not isolated to First Horizon Bank. There is quite a bit of pain in the regional banking sector. Let's take a look at this regional banking ETF from iShares. Now, I've got the 5-year chart pulled up here, and I want to show this because if you take a look at this chart, you can see we are now approaching the lows from 2020, and we know how bad that crisis was. But the thing about this is we are showing no signs of bottoming at this level. So very likely this now financial crisis, and I'm going to call it a financial crisis. You won't hear it called that in the mainstream media. It's always going to be referred to as a banking crisis, but this financial crisis, because that's really what it is. It's the whole financial system that's incredibly levered up and is coming under a lot of pressure as interest rates continue to rise and continue to remain elevated. I am going to go to the chat here before we get into some of more of this banking news. Thanks to everybody who says they like these live streams. Thanks to everybody who tunes in. If you're just tuning in, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. We got Standard Giga Chat. He says, just keep stacking. And yeah, I think that is exactly what people are doing on this news of this collapsing financial system. That's why we're seeing the price of gold and silver get bid up. But, that's just getting started. I think there's quite a bit of room for the price of precious metals to continue their rise just in I'm not going to try and say your last name there, Dustin. I don't want to butcher it. But he says SD Bullion still has Brits at $3.99 over spot price for any quantity. Yeah, we're going to get into that. It is the King Charles Britannias that they're selling, so that's interesting. I want to talk about that too. But again, some of these other banks that we're seeing collapse here. pacwest Bank Corp. I mentioned this in a recent live stream. They were coming under some pressure. Well, they're down another 50% in their share price today. I believe the share price was halted at some point by the old plunge protection team. And, this is another one of these banks that is going to fail. And then we've also got U.S. Bank Corp. Now, they're not seeing the kind of decline that, say, PacWest or First Horizon are seeing, but they are down almost 5% on the day. And you can see that their share price since February, since, really all of this banking crisis kicked off then in March, the share price of U.S. Bank Corp has been nearly cut in half. And this is a big deal because this is not a small regional bank. This is a big bank, and they are coming under some pressure too. And I want to go into some details on U.S. Bank Corp to give you an idea of how significant this development really is. And then we've also got this Western Alliance Bank Corp down 41.77%. So you can see the victims or the casualties, whatever you want to call it, of this financial crisis, of this banking collapse, are continuing to mount up. And it's going to be, not very long in the future before we start seeing some major bailouts, some major money printing to help get the banking system back on its feet. Because, it's on the verge of collapse. I don't think the powers that be are going to allow this system to collapse. But what they're going to have to do to prevent that is going to be absolutely monumental. We're going to see massive bailouts, massive intervention in the very near future, I believe, because this crisis, it seems like every week we're getting a new bank failing. And we got this story from the New York Post on May 1st. That was the beginning of this week. I went over this yesterday, but I just want to mention it again because when we take a look at U.S. Bank Corp, this is going to be relevant. This year's 3 bank failures held $532 billion in assets. Now, all of the banks that failed in 2008, it was about 25 banks, had a combined assets under management of about $526 billion. So they've got this chart here which shows Washington Mutual, the biggest bank failure in U.S. history, failed back in 2008. It was taken over by J.P. Morgan, so we're seeing some history repeating here. We just had First Republic Bank get bought out by J.P. Morgan. That was a bank that had $213 billion in assets under management. But look at this chart. This is the total assets under management for U.S. Bank Corp, that newest bank that's coming under pressure, that's had its share price cut in about half over the past 2 months, and it's dropping today about 5%. They've got $437 billion in assets under management. So if U.S. Bank Corp goes down, that is going to, one, be the largest U.S. bank to fail ever in history. And also, when you add that onto all these other banks that are coming under pressure, it means that we're looking at maybe twice the size of the collapse in 2008. And 2008 was no picnic, if you remember that. It's amazing how clueless the mainstream media seems to be about this. They keep calling it a banking crisis. No one wants to say any of these banks are getting bailed out. It's free market solutions, right? J.P. Morgan buying First Republic Bank. Never mind that the FDIC had to absorb about $13 billion in losses, to help their cronies over at J.P. Morgan. But this crisis is really on track to be absolutely disastrous. Now, there is an interesting poll here from Gallup that shows about half in the U.S. are worrying about their money's safety in banks. And this is a huge problem. Now, if they can't get the public relations campaign, if they can't get the coordinated efforts of the media to instill confidence in this banking system, we are at risk of much more in the way of bank runs. It's all a con game. It's all about confidence. When you have this much leverage in the system, when you have these banks, according to Fortune, they're sitting on $1.7 trillion in unrealized losses from all of these treasuries that they own that are yielding very low rates. When you have that, if you start to have people lose their confidence in the banks and start withdrawing their deposits, what that will do is it will force all of those banks to sell those treasuries, to raise capital, to create liquidity. Markets aren't going to like it when banks have to take $1.7 trillion in unrealized losses and turn them into real losses on their balance sheet. So, we have a lot of risk at the moment, tremendous amount of risk, probably why gold and silver are catching a bid today. Before we get into the details of this poll, I do want to go to the chat again real quick. Question from Metal Mobster. What would be the price of gold and silver if cryptos didn't exist? I feel like cryptocurrency takes from the metals markets. Yeah, that's an interesting point you raised there. I've heard a few folks, John Lee, if you saw my interview with him a couple weeks ago, he brought this up. I've heard Lynette Zhang bring this up. And the idea here is that cryptocurrency was created. Nobody really knows who created Bitcoin definitively as sort of an alternative to draw money away from the precious metals. It's possible, I suppose, that this is true. It seems a bit tinfoil hatty to me, but who knows? I mean, it seems like we've seen a lot of conspiracy theories, quote unquote conspiracy theories proven true over the past several years. So it's very possible that cryptocurrency, or at least some of these cryptos, maybe some of the altcoins, were created as a psyop, as a way to draw money away from the physical metals, or maybe that's not the case. Either way, I do have a little bit of crypto, but I allocate the majority of my resources that I want to take out of the banking system to get into my own custody to gold or silver. Although, I don't know, I'm kind of ambivalent about Bitcoin. Seems like it's kind of a risky thing, a risk asset with not a lot of use case, but a lot of investors seem convinced, a lot of very smart people seem convinced that it is a viable alternative to these fiat currencies. So I don't know. Toker Talk says gambling on digital Ponzi schemes is akin to scratch tickets. I don't know if it's that bad, but who knows? A lot of people say that Bitcoin is in a bubble. I have said this in the past, that Bitcoin is like a bubble asset, but I don't know. It's been around for over a decade now. It's had a lot of ups and downs. Usually with these bubble things like the tulip mania and stuff, they kind of go up, they crash, and then that's it. They're done. And Bitcoin has proven to be a little bit more resilient than all that. So I'm just trying to be objective about it. I don't have an agenda when it comes to crypto one way or the other. I'm not a perma hawk. I'm not a Peter Schiff or anything when it comes to them, but I am a little circumspect when it comes to crypto. Okay, now let's talk about this poll. So according to this poll conducted by Gallup, 19% of Americans are very and 29% are moderately worried about the safety of their money. And that's indicative of the awareness that is being raised in the general population about how risky these banks really are. Now, everybody says, well, the FDIC has your money insured, but the FDIC doesn't have $1.7 trillion to dole out to these banks to make depositors whole. So the problem is that if they're forced to do that, then yes, you will get your money, but it might not buy much because they're going to be printing a lot of money to make that happen. So that's probably why gold and silver are catching a bid, as I mentioned earlier. Now, I want to take a look at some of these deals over at SD Bullion real quick. And, this is to me probably the thing to be stacking right now, these Britannias. It's not just at SD Bullion, it's kind of at all dealers across the board. Even local coin shops seem to have these at a pretty reasonable premium these days. I was watching one of Yankee Stacking's videos. He was over at the coin shop there with Tim. And Tim, this seemed to be the coin that he had available for a low premium. Eagles and Maple Leaves, they have got very high premiums on them right now. I think Maple Leaves are going for about $6 or $7 over, and U.S. Silver Eagles are still crazy expensive, like $40 or something like that. So I'd stay away from those. But if you are looking to get into the precious metals, the Britannias seem to be the thing to get. I picked up a gold Britannia a couple weeks ago from SD Bullion. Now I got one with the Queen on it. Now it looks like those are done, and we're looking at ones with the King on it. So let me know what you think in the chat or in the comments if you're watching this later. What do you think about these Britannias with King Charles? I'm kind of glad that the one I got had the Queen. I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of monarchs in general, but I don't know. It's something about these Charles ones I'm not a huge fan of. But hey, it's an ounce of silver. That's all I really care about when it comes down to it. It's a sovereign coin. And if you look at the markets right now, it seems like at SD Bullion and really just all the major online dealers, generic rounds are going for like $350 over spot. So in that case, I would take the Britannia over that. I think Philharmonics right now are kind of available too. That seems to be a trend that you can get Philharmonics available at a reasonable premium. Some of these little bit more obscure sovereign coins seem to be the thing to be stacking right now. But it looks like in the chat there's kind of a consensus that the queen is preferable. And Toker Talk says he only has platinum Britannias. Yeah, platinum. I don't know how I feel about platinum. Still, interested in stacking it. I think we could be on the verge of a big, increase in platinum in the long term. I think James Anderson posted on Twitter yesterday that he was considering trading a monster box of Silver Eagles, swapping that out for some platinum. Probably smart to swap out the Eagles if you got a monster box of those, because the premiums on them are so high, even if you're swapping it out for another form of silver. But me, I don't tend to really trade my physical bullion. I just try to accumulate it. I don't try to do these swaps and stuff. I guess if the gold to silver ratio really got crazy, then maybe I would consider selling some gold and buying silver, or vice versa, depending on the extreme we get. But I just kind of like to accumulate. ST Bullion, they are a channel sponsor. You can check them out with the link in the description. We've also got Silver Botanicals. I want to ask you a question about Silver Botanicals. Now, they're a channel sponsor. They get these great products made with nano silver, but Dean DeWolf, he's an interesting guy. He's the CEO and formulator over at Silver Botanicals. He's a chemist who specializes in silver. He's got this company that makes silver-based products. If you check out Silver Botanicals with the link in the description, you can use coupon code STACKER to save 10% off your order. But if you've got any questions for a chemist who specializes in silver about its unique properties, you can leave those in a comment, or you can shoot them over to me at smartsilverstacker@gmail.com. I kind of want to do a Q&A thing with Dean and see if we can maybe just ask him some questions about silver. If you have any, thoughts about silver's unique properties. It's very useful in industry. It's one of the most conductive metals, or the most conductive metal of heat and electricity on the periodic table. It's antimicrobial. It has all these amazing uses. So if you want to know more about the physical properties, shoot me a question. And I'm thinking maybe I'll just send those to Dean, let him put it together and answer at his leisure, and then maybe I'll read them in a video. So anyway, just a Q&A video idea I've been thinking about putting together, since we have, as a channel sponsor, an expert, kind of a resident expert in the metal. Okay. Now, we've talked about the financial crisis here in the U.S. in today's video. The banks are continuing to fail. We've got a possibility of a crisis far larger than what happened in 2008 playing out here. Now, one major difference between now and 2008, not only are more banks at risk now and the assets under management significantly larger, but we have a much different geopolitical backdrop against which this crisis is occurring. And I think that this is going to have a major impact on how this plays out, especially how it plays out in regards to the precious metals. So this is an update from yesterday. Russia says Ukraine tried to kill Putin with nighttime drone attack on the Kremlin. Now, there were no assassination attempts against world leaders, if I can recall, back in 2008. So, the world is getting extremely chaotic here, folks. This is a video, I'm going to play it for you real quick, of this drone attack. You see this thing flying in and then blowing up over the dome of the Kremlin. I think the Russians are saying that they, intercepted it somehow. There's a lot of speculation, a lot of rumors here that this could be a false flag. Possibly. I believe the Russians are blaming the Ukrainians. Other folks are saying there's no way that a drone would be able to get this close to the Kremlin. They would not be able to penetrate Russian air defenses so far. Who knows what is actually going on here, but this is a major escalation. We had Dmitry Medvedev, the former president. I believe he's now called for the elimination of Zelensky and his cabal of leaders over in Ukraine in response to this. The Ukrainians have denied that they had anything to do with this. But I don't know. Who cares what actually happened here or what was behind this? Obviously, it's important, but the main takeaway that we can take from this is that things are devolving in Ukraine and in Eastern Europe rapidly. And we have got the Russians now threatening a nuclear retaliation against Ukraine. And, is this just hot air? Maybe. Are we on the verge of nuclear war? Maybe. But I want to point out, I mentioned this in a recent video, that if we see some kind of a nuclear strike in Ukraine, could just be a small tactical nuclear strike, Doesn't have to be anything, world changing. But if we see that, there will be a huge change in the world in terms of the panic that will ensue. I mean, we are talking massive crisis in financial markets, panic buying, all sorts of things could come about from one small bomb going off in Ukraine. And I don't think that if we see a nuclear exchange there, that it's necessarily going to lead to a massive strategic exchange where we see, the world end. I mean, if it does, I don't know. Get your other preps in order, I guess. Get yourself a copy of Nuclear War Survival Skills by Crescent Kearney. Get the updated version. But even if we just see one weapon used, then we are going to see a panic, the likes of which none of us have ever seen. It has not happened in living memory. Now, before we dive into a little bit more of the geopolitical stuff to wrap this live stream up, I want to go to the chat and just get some of your comments. If anybody has any questions, comments, anything you want me to touch on in today's live stream, do let me know. Some people saying it looks real to me. The drone was way too small and too low. Yeah, it looks like a firework. Again, tons of speculation and rumors about what this attack actually consisted of. But Black Swordsman says, small tactical strike. Okay, I'm not going to read the rest of that comment. It's kind of funny. Yeah, well, a small tactical strike. I mean, they have, the Russians have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. They have very small tactical nuclear weapons. I think, to say small, yes, even the smallest tactical nuclear weapon makes the largest conventional munition look like, a firework by comparison. But still, they have weapons significantly smaller than the ones that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we're talking, a kiloton, I believe, some maybe even sub-kiloton. I think the nuclear football is the U.S. Smallest ever tactical nuclear weapon device. You're talking about battlefield weapons, the things used on a battlefield the same way artillery would be used or conventional munitions. But if they decide to do this, if this is used as a retaliation, maybe not to this assassination attempt, but we know it's on the table, and if the escalations continue, if the Ukrainian offensive gets some ground, we might see a tactical nuclear weapon go off. It will then be too late, I think, to get into the precious metals, and it will be too late to do a lot of your prep, so make sure you're putting away emergency food, water, all of the things that you might need, because you don't want to be caught out at the stores trying to buy bottled water when a panic ensues from this kind of an event. And, forget about the stock market. If you want to talk about banks are collapsing now, just wait until something like this plays out. There will be pandemonium in the streets. And I'm not trying to be a fearmonger here. This is the situation we find ourselves in. Pure and simple. I mean, in 2008, China and Russia were, more or less friendly with the U.S. The 2014 war between the Ukraine and Russia hadn't even started yet. China was still buying U.S. treasuries hand over fist. We had a very friendly geopolitical situation compared to today back during the last crisis, and that is going to be a big problem. Lori YouTube says, very good discussion, SSS, though I think it's going to get boring down in the bunker. Yeah, well, something else you might want to stock up on, get some memory sticks, get some micro SD cards, put all your favorite podcasts, videos, download the Smart Silver Stacker channel and put that on there so you can listen to me talk while you're surviving in your post-nuclear survival bunker. Again, if there's a strategic war, I don't know what to tell you about that, but the likelihood of that is still very small, whereas the likelihood of a tactical nuclear weapon going off is rising by the day. But enough on that. Suffice to say, the shizzy's going to hit the fizzy here in Ukraine very soon. But even if it doesn't, the geopolitical arena poses a lot of other risks for the U.S. dollar. This is a story from the Cradle from April 27th. 5 Arab states plus Iran among 19 nations ready to join BRICS. So they list the countries here. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Algeria, Egypt, Bahrain, and Iran have formally asked to join the BRICS group of nations as it prepares to hold its annual summit in South Africa. So yeah, August is going to be a very interesting month. Keep your eyes on August. Probably want to do some stacking before that happens. Again, not financial advice, just telling you my thoughts on things. I do still think that we could see a pullback here in the price of gold and silver from these levels, unless we get a close in gold above the previous all-time high. Say we get a close in gold above $2,100, a close in silver above $28. I do think we'll be off to the races then, and the risk of a pullback will be significantly diminished. But until that happens, We do still have a significant risk in the price of a pullback in the price of gold and silver. But if that happens, I'm kind of hoping that happens, because if it does, I'm going to be stacking some of those Britannias from SD Bullion, because come August, we are going to see these nations joining the BRICS organization. We also know at that summit they're going to be talking about the introduction of a currency, a BRICS currency, an alternative currency to the US dollar. Let's see, let's go to the chat here real quick before we get into this. No one will ever want the BRICS currency. That will be, what, 2% of trading? Well, I don't know. A BRICS currency might become a lot more appealing if we see a financial crisis break out in the US and we revert to bailouts and pivoting. I mean, right now, everybody thinks that the Fed has everything under control. Everybody thinks that the Fed is getting inflation under control. They're going to get back to their 2% target, that the U.S. economy is strong. They tell us the U.S. banking system is strong and well capitalized and safe and sound. We keep hearing that from the current administration and his cronies. We hear that from Jerome Powell. We hear that from Janet Yellen. But we know that that's all BS. And if the financial system here falls apart and they start printing dollars like crazy, it might make a BRICS currency or something like that look more appealing. Now, I think the bigger problem with the BRICS currency is if these 19 nations join BRICS, so we get like a Super BRICS or BRICS Plus, it's going to be really hard for 24 countries to coordinate their efforts to create a currency or to circumvent dollar hegemony. But I think that their efforts to do so are going to be directly proportional to the incentives that the U.S. gives them. If the U.S. continues to hand out these sanctions, continues to freeze countries' dollar assets, say we get into a conflict with China and we ramp up the economic warfare, which is already well underway between the U.S. and China, then the dollar may look less and less appealing. You've got this currency that's being used to sanction. It's being used as a weapon, essentially. You have got a currency that is very likely to be printed a lot in the very near future as this banking crisis plays out. I mean, it's very interesting that this BRICS summit that's going to be taking place in August is kind of on the same timeline to coincide with the collapse of the U.S. financial system. Now, is that coordinated? Is that a WEF plot? I have no idea. Is that part of the Great Reset? I mean, there's plenty of, tinfoil hat speculation that we can do right here. But I mean, even if you just look at the evidence, the objective facts, the U.S. dollar is in a lot of trouble here. And the U.S. financial system is in a lot of trouble here. We're looking at a crisis that could dwarf the 2008 financial crisis. And, another big difference between now and back in 2008 is the level of debt in the U.S. We're sitting on $31.7 trillion in debt, growing rapidly. According to the latest statement from the Treasury, the current U.S. deficit is on track to be greater than $2 trillion this year. And that is going to go up a lot more if we see a financial crisis really play out. I mean, look at what happened in 2020. Look at how spending ballooned as they bailed out all these organizations. Well, one thing about bailouts, they have to get bigger every time. So, if we really see a major financial crisis play out here in the U.S. this year that requires bailouts, I mean, we're already there. We're already getting bailouts. But if it really becomes systemic, the level of money printing, the level of deficit spending is going to absolutely dwarf even previous attempts at such ventures. And the last time in 2020, it was pretty big. So we're going to see a ton of money created. This is a chart of deficit spending in the previous decade, rather leading up to the 2008 financial crisis. You can see in 2008, we had a budget deficit of $454.8 billion. So now we're sitting around $2.2 trillion if you want to annualize the data from the latest Treasury report. So, the deficit about 4 times larger, a little bit more than 4 times larger than it was during the previous financial crisis. Also, U.S. national debt. The debt back in 2008, I've got that pulled up here. Back in 2008, national debt, a little over $10 trillion. That was a 68% debt to GDP ratio. And today, we are at $31.7 trillion, so about 3 times the debt. And relative to the size of the economy, the indebtedness is about double because we've got a debt to GDP ratio of about 120%. So, the backdrop that this financial crisis is occurring against is much, much worse than in 2008. Not only is it orders of magnitude larger in terms of the amount of assets that these banks are in charge of, it's also occurring against a backdrop of global de-dollarization and a U.S. budget that, it wasn't great in 2008. A 68% debt to GDP ratio is nothing to brag about, but in comparison to where we're at today, it's looking pretty good. $10 trillion of debt is not great, but $31.7 trillion is much worse. And so, all I can say is make sure you're stacking, make sure you're getting prepared. Get yourself some emergency food, get yourself a security plan, because as this crisis plays out, I don't know if it's going to go to like Zimbabwe or Venezuela levels here in the US, but if you had asked me back in 2019 what the likelihood of a scenario like that playing out was, I would have told you slim to none. Being realistic. But today, it's a real possibility. And that's a crazy thing. Look at how much things can change just in 4 years. And if you pay attention to the generational theory of Strauss and Howe, then you know that their forecast is that by 2026, that's when we're going to see the real culmination of this crisis play out. And so, if a lot can happen in 4 years, a lot can happen in 2 years too, especially as we accelerate here. And that is the trend. Things are accelerating. Now I'm going to go to the chat here real quick. I'll get this debt clock off because the numbers flying like that's just kind of depressing. Let's just take a look at the banking crisis. Let's take a look at the live charts here on Yahoo Finance. We can see what's going on. Gold up to $2,060. Markets tanking. Oil continuing its decline today, although it looks like maybe it's bottomed out because it's more or less flat. But I'll go to the chat here real quick. If there's anything else you want me to cover, let me know, and then we'll wrap things up. Food prices don't bother me much. I'm more worried about food shortages, Asahi says. Yeah, I don't know that we have to worry about too much about food shortages here in the U.S. at least. We produce a huge amount of food. I think more likely what we could see in the event of an economic collapse type scenario is just that the diversity of food that we are accustomed to in the U.S. may not be available. You might not have out of season produce available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It'll be more like first world problem kind of thing. I don't think there's going to be too many people starving here in the U.S., although I don't know. I guess anything's possible. The only thing that could lead to that kind of a problem in the U.S., I think, is a breakdown of distribution as opposed to an elimination of the U.S. Asahi says, I'm not in the U.S. Yeah, well, if you live in a country that imports food, then yes, definitely you want to have some food on hand. But even in the U.S., I think it's a good idea to have a lot of emergency food. My choice for that is a Mountain House freeze-dried food for, some nice stuff. And then for just calories, stock up on rice, grain, corn, peas, whatever. Dry beans, you can put them in Mylar bags with oxygen absorbers and desiccants. And that's an important part of your preps. You don't want to negate that because, you can't eat gold and silver. You don't want to be forced to eat your expensive King Charles Britannia. It's not going to hurt you. Gold and silver are non-toxic, but not much in the way of calories there. Anyway, anything else in the chat here we got to cover? First timer here, glad to be here and listening. Craig Edmond says that. Thanks, Craig. Appreciate you joining. Thank you all very much for tuning in to this live stream. I really do appreciate it. Don't worry, I am going to be returning to interspersing some of the regular, more produced content here on the channel, but I'm a one-man show when it comes to production, so it's really a choice on any given day between a live stream and a produced video. And sometimes, like today, when we have this breaking news, I like the live streams because it allows me to get information out in a more timely way. If I was recording this video right now, it would be several hours before anybody got to see it because I'd have to edit it and put it together and all that stuff, and live stream is just a little bit more timely. But yeah, we're seeing the price of gold and silver rally on this economic news. We are seeing the price of other assets falling significantly. The banks, look at this, down 37%. Regional bank ETF down 5%. Oh, Bank Corp rallying a little bit, only down 3%. But look, almost cut in half over the past 2 months. And if they fail, U.S. Bank Corp, keep an eye on them. That's going to be the biggest bank failure in U.S. history. Anyway, smash that like button. If you didn't catch the live stream and you are watching after the fact, hey, make sure you click that notification bell so you are notified whenever I go live and you can tune in. Please do smash that like button and just stay safe, everybody. Make sure you're getting prepared. Do what you got to do to get your ducks in a row for a potential crisis, because it looks like it's right around the corner. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe and happy stacking, and I will catch you next time. Smart Silver Stacker out.